What if I told you the royal crown no longer shines with gold, but drips with blood and ashes? In 2025, the gates of Buckingham Palace were torn open, not by ceremony, but by fire. Secrets buried for decades exploded into the streets. Betrayal struck from within. Assassins breached the palace walls. And for the first time in centuries, the monarchy fought not with pageantry, but with survival. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the night the crown nearly fell. Stay with us, because what happened inside those walls will change how you see the royals forever. And if you don't want to miss the truth behind the shadows of power, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The story is just beginning. The announcement detonated across Britain like a grenade. For centuries, the monarchy had hidden behind protocol and shadow, operating with an untouchable arrogance. Now, William declared the end of that era. No more secrets, he said. No more silence. His address wasn't mere politics, it was war against the ghosts of his family's past. And unlike his predecessors, William came armed with evidence and fire. Hours later, the Royal Truth and Reconciliation Archive went live. What it contained was dynamite. Survivors of palace cover-ups, victims of intelligence manipulation, and ordinary citizens silenced by royal influence finally had a weapon. They could log in, submit testimony, demand investigations, and, most shocking of all, access once hidden documents. What was sacred was now public. Files that had slept in locked basements were suddenly a click away. The establishment trembled. Civil servants panicked. Advisors who once felt untouchable watched their own signatures exposed to the world. And yet, for the people outside the palace gates, it felt like an uprising. They gathered in thousands, pressing against the iron bars of Buckingham Palace, waiting for something more than words. Then, as night fell, the gates themselves lit up. Projected across the metal in burning white letters was a phrase that felt like both a warning and a vow: never again. The crowd erupted. Some shouted. Others sobbed. Fists rose in the air. It was no longer just a royal announcement, it was revolution written in light. Inside, the palace moved like a battlefield command post. Old staff clung to their traditions like shields. New blood, handpicked by William and Kate, tore apart obsolete practices. Ceremonies were slashed, staff ranks reorganized, and the aristocratic rot that had plagued the monarchy for decades was gutted piece by piece. A once bloated institution slimmed into something sharper, leaner, and deadlier. And with every strike of reform, the monarchy's enemies multiplied. Behind polished smiles, members of the old guard plotted in whispers. They had survived scandals before, surely they could survive William's crusade. But what they underestimated was the rage that now fueled him. He wasn't just a prince cleaning house. He was a son haunted by a dead mother, determined to make her voice rise louder than the grave. Public trust surged. Approval ratings soared to heights unseen in modern times. For the first time, the monarchy looked less like a relic and more like a weapon for justice. The young and disillusioned, those who once mocked the crown as meaningless, began to rally behind it. But the shadows did not rest. Far away in Balmoral, King Charles sat in seclusion, surrounded not by advisors but by his own ghosts. He scribbled into pages of an unofficial memoir, angry, erratic, and unfinished. Each page was said to carry the bitterness of a dethroned man, but no one knew when or if it would see the light. His crown may have been untouched in ceremony, but in spirit, it was already ripped from his head. And in the Scottish countryside, Camilla slipped into silence. Her name vanished from official websites, documents, and appearances. She was not declared exiled, no. Exile was merciful. This was punishment. A slow erasure of existence. One day, she was the queen consort, the next, she was a ghost walking through rural estates, her legacy rotting in silence. The monarchy stood reborn under William and Kate, sharper and prouder than it had been in decades. But in its rebirth was blood. The betrayal of the past left scars that could not heal overnight. Justice might have been declared, but justice was not finished. The deeper files, the ones not yet touched, still whispered. And somewhere in the night, voices asked the question William's glowing phrase could not answer: Was this truly the end of corruption, or just the beginning of a darker reckoning? The gates of Buckingham Palace glowed. The people roared. And history trembled at what would come next. The archive was open, but what poured out of it was not paper and ink, it was poison. Within days of William's announcement, citizens began flooding the system with testimonies. Names were named. Dates were remembered. Files once redacted in thick black lines now appeared in chilling clarity. Reports of palace intelligence cover-ups, secret payoffs, hushed scandals of abuse, all spilled into the public square. The monarchy, once the master of secrets, now looked like a fortress bleeding from every stone. At first, the palace tried to manage the storm, issuing calm statements about healing and accountability. But the words could not hide the fury outside. Each new document became a weapon in the people's hands. Protests grew louder. Crowds did not just gather, they surged, pressing against the gates like waves against a cliff. And then came the first attack. On a humid night in August, just 3 days after the archive's launch, a mob of masked demonstrators stormed the royal security barricades. They weren't there for ceremony, they wanted answers, and they wanted revenge. Bottles shattered. Smoke flares lit the air in scarlet and orange. Police clashed with fists, batons, and shields. Outside Buckingham Palace, centuries of royal power dissolved into street warfare. The phrase, "never again," still burned across the iron gates, but now it glowed against a backdrop of chaos. Sirens wailed. Helicopters tore through the clouds. Protesters chanted Diana's name, invoking her like a martyr whose ghost demanded justice. Inside the palace, William refused to hide. Against every advisor's warning, he appeared on a balcony, silhouetted against the inferno outside. His presence was not regal, it was defiant, a commander standing on the edge of battle. The crowd saw him and roared. For a moment, the violence faltered, their rage redirected into something like allegiance. But William knew this was no victory. The storm was only beginning. Behind closed doors, darker forces stirred. Old aristocrats, lords, financiers, and advisers who had thrived under secrecy, saw their empire crumbling. They had ruled not with crowns, but with hidden ledgers and closed doors. Now, with every revelation, their power bled away. Desperation breeds violence, and whispers turned into plans. One night, the archive itself came under siege. Hackers, funded by shadow benefactors, launched coordinated strikes to corrupt files, erase testimonies, and plant false trails. For hours, the system teetered on collapse. But William had anticipated this. He had brought in digital warriors, not bureaucrats, but cyber defense specialists from outside the old palace machine. They fought back with code like soldiers in a digital war. By dawn, the archive still stood, bruised but unbroken. Yet the message was clear, enemies of reform would not go quietly. In Balmoral, Charles wrote furiously. Pages piled high, littered with confessions and denials. He told his staff his memoir would reveal the true enemies of the crown. But those who read the drafts whispered that it was less truth and more rage, a desperate man trying to rewrite a past that had already condemned him. Meanwhile, Camilla vanished deeper into the fog of Scotland. Once a queen, now a recluse, her estate bristled with private security. Locals said she rarely left her home, except at night, when she wandered the grounds alone, muttering, clutching letters no one else had ever seen. Her erasure from royal life was not just administrative, it was spiritual. She had become a ghost haunting her own story. Back in London, the monarchy reshaped itself into something it had never been, an engine of exposure. Outdated rituals were hacked away. Ancient ceremonies, once drenched in gold and lace, were stripped down to bare bones. Court officials who resisted were cut loose, their names added to public lists of non-cooperative staff. Each dismissal sent shockwaves through the corridors of power. The monarchy, reborn under William and Kate, was no longer a velvet empire, it was steel. Every move was deliberate, every reform another strike in a silent war against corruption. And the people loved it. Polls climbed higher, the youth rallied louder, and for the first time in generations, the royals looked unstoppable. But scars do not vanish overnight. Every secret revealed left a wound, and every wound demanded blood. Families torn apart by old cover-ups now demanded more than apologies, they demanded prosecutions. Survivors wanted arrests. Protesters wanted trials. And the monarchy, for all its new transparency, stood at a crossroads: deliver justice, or become its next victim. In the shadows, the question lingered like a dagger: could William's crusade survive the enemy's gathering in silence? Or would the crown, stripped bare, finally collapse under the weight of its own sins? The archive burned with truth. The streets burned with fury. And over London, thunder rolled, ominous and unrelenting. The war for the crown had only begun. By autumn 2025, William's reforms had gutted centuries of secrecy. Advisors once cloaked in shadows were dragged into the light, some resigning in disgrace, others clinging to power while whispering rebellion. Corruption wasn't gone, it had embedded itself in the palace walls. The first betrayal came from within. Sensitive files leaked early to tabloids, fueling critics who shouted, "The crown is reckless. The crown endangers the nation." William's eyes burned as he declared in council, "We are under attack, not from the people, but from ourselves." Kate leaned forward, steel replacing grace, "Then we cut deeper. Anyone who betrays this house will lose everything." Thus began the purge of autumn. Staff were interrogated, offices ransacked, loyalists of the old guard erased. Some slipped quietly into resignation, others were dragged out in the night. But resistance struck back harder. An explosion ripped through a service wing of Buckingham Palace, no casualties, but the message was clear: the monarchy was vulnerable. The nation split. Some demanded William press forward. Others claimed he had gone too far. Protests turned violent, red smoke staining the skies as London teetered on the edge of siege. Far away, Charles raged in Balmoral, scribbling a venomous memoir that blamed sons, ministers, even Diana's ghost, for stealing his crown. Camilla, erased from public life, clawed at her exile with desperate letters and ignored calls, a dethroned queen wandering her own ruins. The crown had survived the riots, but inside its own walls, betrayal had already begun to rot it from within. But the true war pulsed inside Buckingham. For every reform William passed, another dagger turned in the dark. Anonymous threats appeared in his office. Surveillance cameras caught masked intruders testing the palace perimeter at night. Even among his allies, paranoia grew. Who was loyal? Who was waiting for their chance to strike? Kate took command where William could not. She oversaw new security regimens, reshaping palace defense into something closer to a military fortress than a royal residence. Guards drilled day and night. Watchtowers scanned the grounds with high-tech equipment. Every visitor was treated as a potential enemy. The monarchy was no longer draped in velvet, it was armored in steel. But no amount of armor could stop the storm building within. The people had tasted blood. The archive kept releasing secrets, each one a new scar across the monarchy's past. Former allies demanded trials, criminal charges, even executions. Transparency is not enough, protesters shouted. Justice or nothing. Inside William's council chamber, the words felt like gunfire. He knew he had pushed the monarchy to the edge of survival. Now he had to choose, bend under the pressure or strike harder than any monarch before him. The palace thundered with tension. Betrayals multiplied. And in the shadows of its gilded halls, the crown itself hung by a thread, swaying between rebirth and collapse. The storm was no longer coming. It was here. London was a city under siege. By late autumn, the archive's revelations had shaken the nation into open conflict. What began as protests had spiraled into riots, then into pitched battles between citizens and police. The streets of Westminster filled with smoke, fires burning in the shadows of monuments once meant to symbolize stability. Statues were defaced, windows smashed, barricades built. Every night, the air crackled with sirens, screams, and the deafening thunder of unrest. Buckingham Palace became a fortress. Floodlights burned through the night. Armored vehicles patrolled its perimeter. The once proud symbol of monarchy now looked like a war zone, its iron gates scarred from firebombs, its walls graffitied with the words, "Justice for Diana." Inside, William felt the weight of history pressing against his chest. Every decision was war. Every step was danger. His reforms had won the people's trust, but they had also unleashed a fury that could not be contained. They wanted more, blood for blood, names for names. And then it came, the first true assassination attempt. On a freezing November night, as William prepared to address the nation once more, a bullet tore across the palace courtyard. Guards shouted, shields rose, chaos erupted. The sniper never breached the palace walls, but his message rang clear: William was marked. Not as a reformer. Not as a king-to-be. But as a target. The weapon was traced to black market dealers tied to old aristocrats, men stripped of their power, now fighting like cornered beasts hungry for revenge. Kate's fury ignited. Enough, she hissed, ordering the palace to double security and hunt down every conspirator. She was no longer just a princess, she was commander of a monarchy at war. But outside, the people grew restless. The archive revealed horrors, silenced children, buried assaults, vanished records. Survivors demanded trials, chanting for justice. William faced the cameras, stone-jawed, those who betrayed the people will face the people. His words shook the nation, but also unleashed a storm he could not control. Trials began in secret, but rumors of staging spread like fire. Crowds rioted, cars burned, London cracked under rage. At Balmoral, Charles' leaked memoir spewed wild accusations: Diana's death orchestrated, William a pawn, the archive a cover-up. The palace called it madness, but his words poured gasoline on the chaos. Camilla's silence shattered. Letters surfaced where she raged against William and Kate, calling them executioners of the old crown. Dismissed by some as bitterness, whispers still claimed she possessed files, proof that could scorch William's crusade if released. As December closed in, the monarchy stood on the brink. The people who had once cheered William's reforms now roared for blood. His enemies, once hidden in shadows, struck openly with bombs, bullets, and propaganda. Inside the palace, Kate prepared for war, William stood unflinching, and the old guard sharpened their knives. And then came the night that changed everything. On the eve of December 1st, tens of thousands gathered outside Buckingham. The crowd stretched across the mall, torches and flares painting the night red. Chants shook the earth: justice! 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 Police lines held for hours, but the crowd surged like a wave of fire. Barricades fell. Gates shook. Projectiles rained. And then, impact. A blast detonated near the north gate, shaking the palace foundations. Screams pierced the night. The crowd erupted into panic, but the attackers pressed forward, armed and merciless. It was no longer a protest. It was an assault. Inside the palace, alarms blared. Guards drew weapons. William and Kate were rushed into secure chambers. For centuries, the monarchy had survived through shadows and silence. Now it faced survival in fire and blood. The war for the crown had come to its reckoning. The night of December 1st would be carved into history with blood and fire. The explosion near the North Gate had shattered more than steel, it had shattered the illusion that the monarchy was untouchable. Buckingham Palace, once the fortress of kings and queens, stood under siege. Flames licked the blackened stone. Gunfire cracked across the courtyards. Shadows moved through smoke, attackers disguised among the rioters. Inside the palace, chaos reigned. Guards hustled William and Kate through reinforced corridors, their footsteps pounding like war drums. The air vibrated with sirens and distant screams. The monarchy, reborn only months ago, now stood inches from annihilation. William refused to run. In the command chamber deep beneath the palace, he slammed his hand on the table. "We face this here," he growled. His advisors begged him to flee, to retreat to Windsor or Sandringham, but he shook his head. "If we run now, the crown dies. We hold this ground." Kate's eyes burned. "Then let them come," she whispered. "We are not ghosts, we are steel." Outside, chants of "Justice for Diana" clashed with gunfire as the gates buckled under siege. Then betrayal struck from within, and aides sabotaged the locks. Assassins stormed the palace, cutting down guards as blood splattered marble floors. History trembled as William, pale but resolute, stood not a spectator but soldier. Kate gripped his arm. "We don't break. Not now. Not ever." The intruders pressed forward until reinforcements arrived. Royal guards stormed the corridors, gunfire and smoke tearing through the halls. By dawn, the palace was a battlefield, gates twisted, statues shattered, bodies broken. Yet the monarchy stood. At sunrise, William emerged, ash-streaked, torn suit, but unbroken. Facing the crowd, he thundered, "My mother's memory will not be silenced. We stand with the people, scarred, but unbroken." The silence shattered into a roar of unity. Far away, Charles sat in isolation, his memoir unfinished, his legacy crumbling. Camilla faded into silence, her era ended not by ceremony but by exile. From the ashes rose a different monarchy, scarred, militant, raw. No longer relic, but resistance. Yet even in triumph, shadows remained. The archive still held files unopened. Betrayals still lingered unnamed. The enemies of reform had been blooded, but not erased. And the people, though united for now, would one day hunger for answers that no crown could ever fully give. William and Kate stood together, their silhouettes cut against the rising sun. The monarchy had survived the storm, but it had been remade in fire. No longer a house of secrets. No longer a palace of silence. Now it was something else entirely, a crown of ashes, burning but unbroken. Like and subscribe the channel for more interesting updates.